Good to go, Mr. Chair.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance once again at this Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting dated Tuesday, December 20th at 10 a.m. And I'm going to move right along here. A review of the December agenda. Any questions? Is everybody happy with the agenda? So we can move it right along.
Not seeing any questions or comments, Mr. Chair.
So we can move right along here then. Review and approval of the November 22nd business meeting minutes. I'm going to need a motion, or I'm going to need corrections or edits.
I believe Mike Pearnock has corrections.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick one. I had forwarded these changes to Jared to make it easier. Mike Pearnock asked about fishermen targeting bluefin tuna, and I just added to it where a properly permitted vessel has the ability to fish recreationally, commercially. Jared Silva clarified that if you're fishing recreational bluefin tuna is taught, that a properly permitted vessel can retain the tuna and sell it. Under such a scenario, properly permitted vessels will be able to fish under the recreational mackerel limit and retain a commercial grade tuna. Additionally, if a commercial tuna is retained, and all other catch on board the vessel need to conform to commercial fishing rules. I think I have that right. It was just done for clarification because I think we're splitting hairs there. I want to make sure there was no misinterpretation by me or others.
Yeah, that's correct, Mike. So effectively, the edit is to add properly permitted to clarify the category of permit holders who are category of fishers who may retain bluefin under those circumstances. And then I believe there was also a correction to a typo in there.
Yep. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
So I have a question, Jared. In order to land and sell, you need a commercial bluefin tuna permit.
You need the federal permit to fish for to retain tuna, and then you need a state landing permit to sell any fish in Massachusetts, including federally managed species, such as tuna.
Thank you. So if you're recreational tuna fishing, you're going to go on the rec, the 20 fish per day, or?
For mackerel?
Yes.
Yes.
And then if you retain a fish over 73 inches and you've got the permit to sell it, you're still only going to be able to maintain 20 mackerel per angler on the vessel.
If there is no other catch on board that vessel that is recreational, then you could conceivably hold more than the 20 mackerel recreational limit because you would be commercially fishing. But if there's things like striped bass aboard the vessel, or you are retaining tuna below that commercial minimum size for recreational purposes, then the 20 mackerel limit would apply.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarity, Michael, Jared.
Well, thank you. I'm all set. Thank you.
So I need a motion to approve the business meeting from November.
I'll make the motion, Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley. Need a second?
Tim Brady, second.
Thank you, Tim.
We're gonna need a roll call vote on this because it's approving a matter. So Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Leo Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Tim Brady,
Yes.
Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Lou Williams, Sookie Sawyer.
Yes. Lou Williams, yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you all. I really have no comments other than to thank everybody for making this late December meeting. We only have a couple of action items, and I've been told that this is going to be a quick meeting. We should be done by noontime. Therefore, I'm going to roll it over to Commissioner Ron Amidon. Ron, are you on?
Commissioner Amadon was unavailable today. He wishes everyone a happy holiday.
Okay, thank you for that, Jared. Let's move along to law enforcement. Who's on today?
Lieutenant Bass is unavailable, and we had discussion before this meeting. We really have nothing to report today.
Thank you. Officer Moran, moving on to the director, Dan.
Thank you, Ray, and good morning, everyone. Thanks everybody for convening for this short meeting. Just have a few updates. We're going to hear later in this meeting about some industry scoping meetings that we held last week with the Fluke fleet, the draggers and some of the commercial fishermen, but also another session concerning horseshoe crabs with many of the same individuals, but also some of the conservationists. And there's a presentation on some of those outcomes. It was a really good meeting. Obviously it's post-COVID, even though there's some COVID going around, but we were able to meet in person, and I think people really appreciated it. We got a lot of compliments after the meeting from all sides of the room, the conservation side, the commercial side, the dealer side. Everybody was really happy they could come together and express their opinions on these issues that are important to them. I also want to just mention that the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance, for which Ray is part of that group. They were one of the authors of what we called the Port Profile Project, where we compiled all the essential statistics about each community in the Commonwealth that had a commercial fishery. And the purpose of that report, if you'll recall, is to just like shed some light on each town's commercial fisheries. And this is especially important if, like, the fleet wants the town to make some investments, in infrastructure, or they have concerns about, escalating tie-up fees, things like that, just to stress the importance and of the commercial fisheries in that community, but also as sort of just informational, ammunition. When a community might also go for a state grant or a federal grant to improve infrastructure. We met in Provincetown a couple of weeks ago. It was really a great meeting. I went out there and spoke to them not only about the report, but just about issues in general. Tonight, there's a meeting in Wellfleet that I'm attending with members of the Alliance to talk about the project. And I think there's another one in Sandwich, but that organization has not allowed this document to just sit on the proverbial shelf and gather dust. They've really ran around the state, at least the Cape part of the southeastern Mass, to promote the document, and I really want to credit them for that. The last thing I want to mention is Seafood Marketing Committee met yesterday. As you may recall, thanks to Bruce Tarr's legislation about 8 years ago, we are able to retain $250,000 of our permit fees into a dedicated account that we hire our seafood marketing program coordinator, that's Wendy Minardi, and all the associated spending. And by the way, the Port Profile Project was one of the things that we spent our money on about 4 years ago. So we met yesterday, and the topic was red listing of lobster fisheries by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, and debating, appropriate responses to that. And the consensus was for the DMF Seafood Marketing Program to put out some positive educational materials about the overall conservation efforts for right whales, but also the sacrifices being made by the lobstermen. We really felt it was unfair that the fishery or the consumers be told to not buy lobster. We felt it was unjustified, and so we want to portray the positive side of all that we've done over the last few years, and we look forward to doing that over the next few months. So that's all I have. I'm going to let the agenda proceed. But again, thanks to everybody for coming together right before the holiday.
Questions for the director?
Suki?
Yeah,
Super,
thanks,
you're
Ray.
recognized.
Thanks, yeah. Thanks, Jared. Dan, I wanted to ask the commissioner, but he's not here. What's the status of the letter from the governor supporting the industry and the credit for the right whale closure? Is there any comments on that anywhere? Any discussions at the governor's level?
Great question. I don't know if that has proceeded, but you know what, Suki? We have some late breaking news that we're going to get into under Bob Glenn's presentation about protected species. There's been some late breaking developments this morning that Congress has put together a package in what's called the omnibus spending bill that does some amazing things regarding the large whale take reduction plan. And it essentially puts on hold for 6 years any new regulations, and at the same time creates a whole lot of lucrative spending for things like gear research and rerunning models and things like that Bob, I think, is going to try to touch on. We only saw this morning at 8 o'clock. We heard rumors about it over the weekend, but this morning it's out. And if you go on to into your news searches, the Washington Post is covering it and the Boston Globe is covering it. So there's a lot of buzz. And I think we're going to talk about that. So we wrote the letter. I believe it went up past the secretary. I don't know what the governor's office has done with it, but I think what's happening this morning may make that a moot point. Bob,
Okay, great.
we'll get to that under Bob's presentation.
All right, I'll wait for that then, Bob.
Yep.
Dan, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for the director?
Not seeing any other questions or comments, Mr. Chair.
All right, Dan, I have a couple of maybe comments, questions. I understand you and Doreen are quite the team when you present before these different Board of Selectmen on the Cape. We're getting pushback from Falmouth. They're not getting back to Doreen at all. So I don't know if somebody within the agency could get in touch with the Board of Selectmen's office and try to schedule something. That's number one. And number two, prior to COVID, we used to have Fish Day up on the hill. It's where the public was presented with underutilized species in the state. Have you heard anything about a Fish Day? It usually occurs over the winter or early spring. Have you heard anything about that, or could you suggest?
I can look into it. I have not heard anything about it. Was that something that was hosted by the partnership, Ray?
I'm not sure. I know you and your staff, Melanie was running.
Yeah.
Fish,
Okay.
Fish
Yeah,
around.
that was kind of a division of a Department of Fish and Game.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Ron brought venison
Right.
chili or something.
Yeah.
Yes, but
I can look into that.
all right.
I think things will become clearer by mid to late January regarding the schedule for next year and with the new administration.
And when you're with Doreen tonight up in Wellfleet, maybe you can chat with her about
Falmouth.
Falmouth.
Yep,
Yeah,
certainly.
all the other towns have been very receptive, as you well know. All right, thank you. We'll move right into action items. The period 1 summer flounder in season adjustment and trip limit increase.
Yep. So this is a routine. When I say routine, we do this periodically when we see underutilized quota. It's usually done, later in the season, but because we have a high trim limit currently, that was established by this commission through the same process of 10,000 pounds to try to use up the remaining, about 40% of the remaining quota. We want to do this in advance of the January 1 opening so that the fleet can continue to fish at this higher limit. As you can see on the slide, their next year's quota is practically the same as this year's, and we have a substantial underage, and there are underages in almost every state. This is just at this point, it doesn't make much sense to have restrictive trip limits. So We would like to start that season off with the higher trip limit. The regulations require us, when we are approaching 30% of the annual quota, to dial it down to that lower trip limit, which would be, I believe, 100 pounds. And then we open it again up on April 23rd with the summer limits. So we think it's appropriate to, we really don't need the lower trip limits, which would be 3,000 pounds beginning January 1st. I would forecast what would happen is I would be coming to you in January, late January, early February, asking you to raise this up again, which I don't think is necessary. So the overall trend of this fishery is the fish are moving to deeper water and more eastern waters. So that's why we've gotten the quota as big as we have, because there is a north and eastward shift to the species. And we have a whole lot of quota, and I think our rules are a little bit behind. It's possible that this quota could go down in future years after the next stock assessment. And if it does, we would probably, we won't be, well, we'll take it year at a time, but it's unlikely that with a substantially lower quota that we would ever have a 10,000 pound trip limit on January 1st. But under the current conditions, we'd like to see the fish coming into our local ports and not forcing them to steam back to, to the states where some of these boats come from. With higher trip limits in places like New Jersey and North Carolina or Virginia, it makes little sense to burn all that fuel just to get those fish home, where the state has a higher trip limit. So for now, and beginning of the season, we would like to raise the limit effective January 1st from the 3,000 that's on the books to a 10,000 pound trip limit. Jared, fill in the gaps.
I'd want to add two things to that, Dan. One, last year we opened the period one fishery with a 2,500 pound, or this year rather, the 2022 season, the last period one fishery, we opened with a 2,500 pound trip limit. And we ended up taking about 50%, a little less than 50%, I think, of the period one allocation. So about 15% of the overall quota. By upping that to 10,000 pounds, we're probably going to improve the utilization of that to some extent. Getting to my second point, I've talked to a number of seafood dealers on this subject, and with the availability of coast-wide quota at present, and given the seasonality of this fishery and demand for the product, the price is rather low at present. I think slide later on in this presentation, but it's about $250 a pound right now. So by having that higher trip limit, it does incentivize boats that maybe won't be profitable going offshore, given fuel costs these days, to target fluke at 3,000 pounds and maybe a profitable trip to do it at 10,000 pounds. So it may enhance opportunities to target it during the winter time, given the location where this fishery occurs and the overhead that's incurred targeting the species. So those would be my two additional comments.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jared. Questions?
Suki?
Yeah, thank you. Do you have a breakdown on what's caught in state waters, actually caught in the state waters, and what's comes from federal waters on this quota?
So for period, for period one, that's exclusively federal waters, and from about October 1 on, it's pretty much exclusively federal waters, and that takes about 20% of the quota in any given year, or in recent years. And then during the summertime fishery, most of it comes from state waters. I could try to share, I'll find a graph that we presented at the industry meeting on this and see if I can't. So I think it might have even been included in your materials for this month. So
if I could just add just a comment, Jared's right. And one of the reasons the summertime fishery takes place primarily in state waters is because that's where the fish are, at least it has been in the past. But also the low trip limits kind of discourage people from, or vessel operators from going to maybe places where there may be more fish. But when you only have a 400 or 500 pound trip limit and the price of fish is only between like $1 or under $2, it sort of discourages the longer trips to the EEZ. So it's a combination of availability, but also economics. And I see Pat Moran has his hand up, and he probably
Yeah.
knows a lot about the New Bedford fishery.
No, I just had a question on the winter one period. Is that going to is that going to be open to everybody, that higher limit that has a fluke permit, or is that still going to require that LOA?
Anyone with a fluke permit, we will be running that pilot program again this season that allows multiple states offloading or the possession of multiple states limits when offloading, and that will require an LOA, but the 10,000 pound limit will be for anyone with a fluke permit. And Suki, looking at the recent data for the past 2 or so years, we have seen a shift in the summertime fishery offshore a bit. It's now about 25% of the landings from June to October. And then it's entirely all of the landings pretty much in the early spring, winter, and late fall.
Hey, Jared,
Yep.
will this trip limit kind of negate the need for that so-called LOA to allow a vessel to go to multiple states? Because 10,000 is so generous, they don't really necessarily need to bounce between states.
I don't know if it would negate the need for it. If a vessel's coming in with more than 10,000 pounds, we wouldn't want to send them to New York and Rhode Island by virtue of freezing them out of coming into Massachusetts.
Right, but I think you'll get fewer takers for that LOA.
We may, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my question, because of the percentage utilized seems to be going downhill, and I was wondering what the cause of that was. What is basically based in state waters or federal waters, or is it because of
Yeah,
the
there's a
landing
couple.
limits?
I'd highlight, and I'd ask Bill Amaru to speak on this as well, but I'd highlight a couple things. We're seeing a reduction in effort in the summertime fishery, both from the hook and line fishery and the trawl fishery. And that's related to probably the presence of fish inshore. The fishery is not as strong inshore as it has been in the past, as the fish have moved to the north and to the east. And a lot of the small boat trawl and hook and line fishery that you used to see out in Vineyard Sound and Nantucket Sound isn't there anymore. Also, rising infrastructure costs on the Cape, I think, have made it less compelling for trawlers to tie up in Hyannis, Harwich, Chatham, Woods Hole for the summer and pursue this fishery. And then the economics of it, I think there's probably other profitable fisheries that folks have gone and pursued. I know a couple of the draggers that fish in this fishery have switched over and they fish scallops or they fish a lobster permit during the summertime, and a number of the hook and liners may go target black sea bass as it's been more profitable and more available. So we're seeing a reduction in participation that's really driving the lower landing. The lower landings, and we also have a substantially larger quota than we've had in 15 or so years. Underutilization wasn't a problem before when the quota was 7,000 pounds or less, but since it's been increased to up over this million and up to about 1.4 million, the lack of participation has underscored the lack of utilization.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if you want to dive into this more now. I'd like to talk about this a little more, but you want to wait till I think it's more about the state guys than the federal guys. So if you want to wait till later with your other presentation, this is specifically about mostly federal waters. So, but I think we should talk more about the state part of it.
Yeah, we're going to dive into some of the stakeholder meeting information that came out from last week's meeting, and that'll be a good time to talk about state management issues.
Okay, Jared, thanks. We'll talk about it later then.
Thanks, okay.
Yeah, so I have a question here. Rodney Avila left it with me when I replaced him on the commission. So with this tremendous increase in quota, and we've got out-of-state boats hopefully landing in Massachusetts ports this winter to sell. I know the reason why North Carolina years ago got such a huge fluke allocation and Massachusetts such a small one was because you had brick and mortar buildings in New Bedford that were being leased by out-of-state buyers. And one of them was a big buyer from North Carolina, and North Carolina ended up getting the lion's share of fluke quota. So has that been addressed at all over the years? So that Massachusetts gets credit for the landed fish and not states other than Massachusetts?
Yeah, the answer is no. We've heard that, to what degree that was an urban myth or if it was as significant as some claimed. Those quotas were established in 1993. And so, we're talking about, a fishery that's now, almost 30 years, or fishery management strategy, it's almost 30 years old. Having said that, the new management scheme has shifted fish to us by virtue of the redistribution and the more positive assessment, buoyed in part because of the altered MRIP data. I think those are grievances that are best just kind of left behind. I don't think the chances of us unearthing documentation from the 80s to get us more quota, we can barely use the quota that we've been given. So I think it's time to put that one to bed.
Yeah,
Dan,
no, I agree with you, Dan, but just curiosity's sake,
Yeah.
are they Massachusetts buyers buying the fish today, or have we still got a number of out-of-state buyers so other states get credit?
No. So today with the very mature quota monitoring system, if you set up shop in Massachusetts, you're a Massachusetts dealer and you're going to report that fish to Story and Anna, and that's Massachusetts fish. And what
Thank
you
you.
do with that, it really doesn't matter. Back in the old days, it was the Wanchese Fish Company, and there was what do you call it, way out slips that a NIMS port agent would drive around and grab bags of these, and then someone would key punch them. But today it's all done electronically. The system's really tight now. So yeah, that's just legacy stuff that doesn't go on anymore.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Any other questions? on
Pat
this?
Moran?
Pat?
Just a quick update. I just checked with a few fluke dealers down here. The price has been $1.75 to $2. That was 2 weeks ago, which is the last time any fluke's been landed in New Bedford. And just really briefly to raise a question, I have not seen that happen ever in my time down here. So where a company, an out-of-state company is setting up and that fish is going to their quota.
Thank you, Pat. Any other hands, Jared?
Bill Amaro, did you have a comment?
Oh, thank you, Jared. I did, but it seemed like the discussion was moving away from that direction. So I thought maybe I would bring it up later. I just would like to say that you covered all of the issues concerning the state waters fishery when you just gave your description as to the shrinking of the fleet, the cost of fuel, the infrastructure breakdowns. One thing you didn't mention that maybe I will here is that the environmental conditions in the sound and in shallow waters in general inshore have changed considerably. The amount of weed and grass is so prolific now in the sound that by the time you've made your second tow, you have to spend an hour cleaning your net before you can get it to fish again effectively. So that's another issue. It may not be real high on people's radar because it's sort of a personal, the man on the boat and his crew issue, but it really is holding back on the potential. And then again, the fish are simply not in the waters at the temperatures that we get to in the summer, and bait movements are different than they were. And then the price. You gotta remember what you just heard, $1.75, $2 a pound. You can't go fishing and make money, even if you do get a reasonably good sized trip you know, those bigger trips offshore, they cost a lot more money. There's a lot more gear damage that occurs on the hard bottom where these fish are this time of year. So, you know, it's a complex and challenging field to play in. That'll be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any other hands, Jared?
Mike Piernock, I saw your hand go up and down. I just wanted to make sure if you had something to say, you had the opportunity.
Michael?
Thank you. You know, I'm just, with what Bill said, I'll just second that. It's the same observations by the recreational community. Facing the same problems too with increased fuel costs, either your recreational angler or for hire fleet has to go farther offshore to get them. And as a result of that fuel cost, fewer are going. So I just wanted to add to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Dan, have you got a recommendation for us to take action on?
I do, to increase the summer flounder trip limit to 10,000 pounds effective January 1st, 2023.
And that would remain in effect through April 22nd, 2023.
Thank you.
Or lowered if we did hit the 30% ceiling for the season.
Members, we need a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept.
I'll second it. It's okay.
All right.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Chair, we
Bill.
need a
Thank
roll
you.
call.
Thank you, Suki.
We need a roll call vote. Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Cleo Bogdan,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Tim Brady,
Yes.
Mike Piernock,
Yes.
Lou Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Jared, Bill Doyle, yes.
Oh, Bill, you're on. Bill,
So
is that a yes
fresh
vote
from
for
a-
you as well?
Yes, it was. Fresh from a root canal.
Oh,
Okay, so we can move along. Letters from MFAC to incoming and outgoing administrations. Who's taking this, Dan?
Yeah, I'll just briefly just give you the background. As you remember, in the last meeting, there was a recommendation, Ray, that you and Commissioner Amadon kind of agreed on to draft a letter and, you know, to the outgoing governor, to the incoming governor, and that the language that we're putting forward, you know, on your behalf, based on your input to Jared, I think is it reads pretty well. Credit to the two of you, and as long as there's no objections, we'll move forward with it. But if you want to invite discussion about the points that are in the letter from the commission, this would be the good time to do that.
Yes, let's open it up to the commission. Commission members. Questions, comments on the letters going to the outgoing administration and the newly elected incoming?
Ray, I will say that one of the things I like about the letter to the incoming is it just states on the record the role of the commission in terms of your ongoing duty, not only to enact all the regulations, but to oversee the director. And sometimes that information isn't well understood by incoming administration, so it's appropriate. Otherwise, if there's misunderstandings, there can be some unfortunate dynamics. Went back to 1990 when the commission members kind of were upset because there was all kinds of talk in the media about changes, and the commission members weighed in. And anyway, it's good to get it on the record.
Yes, I agree with you, Dan. Massachusetts is known as a seafood state, so I think it's imperative that the incoming administration responds to DMF the way the outgoing administration has.
Yeah.
Any comments, questions on, I guess, this motion Dan's gonna, or recommendation he's gonna bring?
Well, I think, Ray, you're just looking for consensus for
Okay,
you
Yeah.
to submit that letter on behalf of the commission under your signature.
Yeah,
Okay,
right, you can either do that by consensus, or if you want, ask the commission to make a motion to move those letters forward, but I'll leave that up to you.
well, what
It
are you
doesn't-
most comfortable with, Jared?
It doesn't
Consensus?
require, by law, it doesn't require a vote for you guys to send a letter. But so that's whether you want to memorialize it as a, as an approved motion, or as a matter of consensus. I don't have a preference.
Well, if there's no objections, let's move it along as
Okay.
consensus.
So I'm not seeing any objections to that, Mr. Chair, so we will send out these letters on your behalf,
Thank you very much,
on
Jared.
behalf of the commission.
Yeah, and thank you for rewriting my words. Let me put it that way. I thank you. Okay, we'll move along to discussion items, federal fisheries management updates. I presume this is going to be Melanie or Bob or.
Well, it'd be Melanie and Nicola, I think, with some separate updates. Who gets to go first? I don't recall how we
Well, let's
scheduled
go with
that.
Melanie. You brought up Melanie's name. Let's go with Melanie.
All right.
All right, I'm ready, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
All right, so sorry I missed the November meeting. Hopefully that written summary was informative, but I do have a bunch of updates after the December New England Council meeting. There were several final decisions, on FMP specific specifications for the upcoming 2023 fishing year and beyond. And I'll also give you a brief preview of the January council meeting and provide a few other relevant regional updates. So next slide. Starting with groundfish, the council approved framework 65. The actions in the framework included a revised rebuilding plan for Gulf of Maine cod that's based on 60% FMSY. This is a change from 75% MSY. Other parts of the framework included revised specifications for recently assessed groundfish stocks. Most of the discussion here centered around three stocks: Georges Bank cod, white hake, and Gulf of Maine haddock. Both white hake and Gulf of Maine haddock are subject to pretty steep drops in catch advice, and that contributed to some ongoing discussion about how to phase in large changes in these catch limits. And ultimately, the council approved the Gulf of Maine haddock specs as recommended by the SFC. That's based on 75% FMSY, and white hake, which is based on 70% FMSY. However, the council is requesting its SFC to consider an alternative for white hake ABCs for 2024 and 2025 based on 75% FMSY. That would be adopted in a future action. To further help mitigate those big swings in catch advice, the council is recommending eliminating the management uncertainty buffer that's applied to the sector sub-ACL. This would be eliminated in FY 2023 only, and only if NIM sets the at-sea monitoring target at 90% or higher. Now, just to note that in Amendment 23, there's a similar provision for elimination of all sector management uncertainty buffers. It's a little different what the council has approved for 2023 only, but we can expect that those management uncertainty buffers for the sector sub-ACLs probably will go away. Georges Bank cod catch advice. If you recall, that had only been approved by the council for FY 2022 in the last specification package. So the council had to come back and kind of close the loop on the limits for 2023 and 2024. And ultimately, the council is recommending the SFC's revised catch advice of 904 metric tons. Now, the 2022 catch advice was set at 754 metric tons. And GARFO has already expressed some concern about justifying this change. This was the one that had a minority report in 2022 about phasing in, and then with the revised catch advice of 904 metric tons this year, there was kind of a flip minority report. So the status quo catch advice of 754 metric tons is an alternative in the framework. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out in the federal final rule. I just say stay tuned. The last part of the framework document was to recommend a revised recreational catch target for Georges Bank cod. And the council considered a few different methodologies, ultimately approving setting the target based on the percent change in ABC from 2022 to 2023 applied to the current catch target, which is 75 metric tons. So under the council's preferred ABC of 904 metric tons, this would result in a rec catch target of 113 metric tons. Under the 754 ABC, it would be more around 81 metric tons. So again, we'll have to see what comes out of the federal final rule. Other sections of the document that had been under discussion were removed. That's the strike through text I have there. This included revisions to the ABC control rules. That will actually be a 2023 management priority. And the other section had to do with adding additional measures to promote Gulf of Maine cod rebuilding. Basically, the council's decision to go with a conservative rebuilding plan of 60% FMSY is really the major tool for there. So there were no additional measures that were implemented. Otherwise, in terms of groundfish updates, GARCO did announce the final rule for Amendment 23, and it will be effective January 9th. Another agency announcement was the ongoing delay of that Atlantic cod research track assessment. It was originally scheduled for March 2023, but it's been pushed off to the summer. So that's probably going to be June, July. And consequently, this pushes off the cod management track assessment, which was originally going to be September 2023. So that's now pushed off until the summer of 2024. Jared, why don't you skip the next slide and just go straight to the scallop slide? And then, so for scallops, this also had final specs being approved. That is framework 36 for the 2023 fishery. In addition to updating the overfishing limits and acceptable biological catch advice, as recommended by the SOC, the council approved measures that will result in about a 25 million pound fishery valued at just under 400 million dollars. The details include a northern Gulf of Maine total allowable landing limit that's set using an F of 0.15 based on the exploitable biomass that's in Stellwagen, Ipswich Bay, and Jeffreys Ledge. This results in a set aside for the northern Gulf of Maine permit holders of just under 400,000 pounds. For the limited access fishery, there will be 2 access area trips in area 2 with a 12,000 pound trip limit and 24 days at sea for open bottom fishing. Area 2 is this new name that is referring to the combined access areas of closed area 2 southwest, southeast, and extension. And you can see some of those area designations on the far right map. The LAGC IFQ vessels may take their access area trips both in area 2 or the Nantucket Lightship North. That was trying to recognize providing some more inshore access. And then after some initial heartburn, initial estimates of northern Windowbane bycatch were revised downwards. And so the council ultimately didn't consider any additional bycatch mitigation measures in framework 36. So that's it for scallops. Next slide. And I don't know if Nick's going to cover this, but spiny dogfish is managed jointly by the New England and Mid-Atlantic states. So both approved a 12 million pound commercial quota for the 2023 fishery. And the big discussion here was how to balance the risk of potential fishery overages with the risk of losing fishery infrastructure at lower quotas. So the fishery will have a 0 management uncertainty buffer. There's no change in the trip limits, which are currently at 7,500 pounds. There is a peer review of the spiny dogfish research track assessment that just wrapped, and a management track is scheduled for 2023. Next slide. Monkfish. This is the final FMP that was scheduled for final specification setting at the December council meeting. However, the council delayed final approval of this framework, it's framework 13, until January. And that's after expressing some significant concerns about catch advice that is flowing from the revised application of the data poor approach. For this fishery, it's the I smooth approach. The council did incorporate the SSC's ABC recommendations for 2023 to 2025 in the framework, but has also requested the SSC to come up with some alternative recommendations to facilitate a transition to the appropriate application of iSmooth. So again, there's this kind of common theme that's popping up in various FMPs about how to phase in changes in catch advice. Whatever the final ABC ends up becoming, the council also needs to consider effort control alternatives. The PDT will be working on some alternatives that will look at changes to days at sea allocations. This is the primary consideration for both the southern and northern fishery management areas. And finally, the council did approve, as part of Framework 13, adjusting the minimum mesh size to 12 inches. It'll be a delayed implementation, so not until 2026. Next slide. So on habitat, the council, if you recall my last update to you, we talked about some of these dedicated habitat research areas that were up for review. They were adopted as part of the Omnibus Habitat Amendment 2. Both the Stellwagen and Georges Bank DHRAs, as they're called, will be retained for another 3 years and then reviewed again. The areas really were established to help better understand how habitat management measures influence stock productivity and to allow for design of more effective conservation measures in the future. So if you're interested in a review of what work has been conducted in the areas to date, I certainly can email out a compilation of that was put together by Garfo. Next slide. So then in terms of other updates, the council wrapped up its December meeting week by setting its management priorities for 2023. Aside from more routine responsibilities and spec settings, I'll just highlight a few of the priorities that may be of potential interest. For groundfish, that would include revising the AVC control rules for the multi-species stocks. This is the highest priority as expressed by the council. Other priorities include evaluating white hake rebuilding, developing how to address swings in Canadian halibut catch, and developing a transition plan for that Atlantic cod stock status update. Scallops, there will be a development of an action for access to the northern edge habitat management area. This is going to be done in collaboration with the Habitat Committee and PDTs. The initial recommendation coming out of leadership was maybe considering a long-term strategic plan. That was not ultimately decided to be pursued in 2023. So the focus will be on northern edge access. For Atlantic herring, there was kind of a swap in priorities. So instead of the herring spawning action, which is Framework 7 in 2023, most of the work will be done on revisiting the Amendment 8 midwater trawl inshore closure. Otherwise, there's also coordination with the Commission and Mid-Atlantic on herring issues, including an analysis of shad and river herring bycatch estimates. Finally, protected species, that's a big one that's going to be cross-cutting across many of the FMPs and with the Mid-Atlantic. So we need to look at developing measures to reduce gillnet interactions with several protected species, not just whales. This also includes a response to the sturgeon action plan. And as I just briefly alluded to, any actions necessary to implement the biological opinion and North Atlantic right whale recovery plan. The other regional updates, herring disaster aid, Garfo has received a complete package from all the involved states through ASMSC. They received it back in October. It's under review at Garfo, but the regional administrator indicated that it'll still be several months as it then needs to move on to the Office of Management and Budget for their mandatory review. Although I don't know, Dan, if you have any more up-to-date information that in terms of that timing. So it sounds like first quarter 2023, maybe we'll get more movement on that. And then port site sampling. This is something that has been popping up at various management bodies, whether it's the council, the Northeast Regional Coordinating Council, CCC. There's been reductions in federal port sampling. This really impacts the collection of individual lengths and age structures, which has a negative impact on numerous stock assessments. And it's just led to quite a few of these regional fishery management entities, the New England Council included, to express their concerns to NIMS, the Science Center, and really NOAA Fisheries headquarters, because that seems to be where the barrier is. And so the Northeast Regional Coordinating Council has been discussing this issue, and the council will be sending a letter to headquarters just underscoring its concerns as well. And then finally, I thought I'd just mention in terms of offshore wind, the Responsible Offshore Development Alliance, or RODA, a few years back partnered with NIMS and BOEM on a project to develop a synthesis of the science regarding offshore wind and fisheries interactions. I had the opportunity to act as a reviewer on the federal fisheries management section of that first report. And at the moment, they're gearing up for a second synthesis of the science, and that's going to have a focus on floating wind, so Gulf of Maine. They'll be holding workshops that are going to be scheduled. Those workshops are intended to help share information on offshore wind, which is very much an emerging technology, and obviously its implications for the fishing industry, as well as trying to identify any opportunities for research partnerships and technical mitigation of impacts. So you can stay tuned on the RODA website, and of course, I'll share any information as I receive it on that. Next slide. And then looking ahead to January, we have January 24th to 26th in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There's not too much out on specifics in terms of the agenda, but 2 decision points I do expect are recreational groundfish. So this is our usual time to provide recommendations to the agency on 2023 recreational measures for Georges Bank cod, Gulf of Maine cod, and Gulf of Maine haddock. And then I expect that we'll be discussing potential control date for the Northern Gulf of Maine scallop fishery. And this has to do with movement of LAGC permits in the Northern Gulf of Maine fishery. Next slide. I think that's all I have. Jared, is there another slide after this? No. Okay, that's it, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Melanie. Questions for Melanie?
Khalil?
Leo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Melanie, as usual. Your information is so comprehensive and for off the record, I don't know how you keep all this straight, but it's really amazing. Back on the record. Could we go back to the monkfish slide, please? I'm looking at this and I see expected discards at 1,000, almost 1,500 metric tons. And I'm curious whether it's for monkfish or cod or halibut or fluke or haddock. How, and I can imagine how you tabulate this, but how do the analysts arrive at a figure such as this? Because discards is such a big issue, and I'm assuming that when we talk about monkfish and expected discards, I'm assuming that 1,400 or 1,500 pounds is not just monkfish, but I'm assuming it might be cod, haddock, or anything else that might be in that area at the time. How is this figure arrived at?
Well, so this, first of all, thank you, Khalil, for your kind words. And the expected discards here refers to monkfish discards, and that's something that's been under review. Dr. O'Keefe with Fisheries Applications Consulting was contracted a year or two ago to help update these. And so this is both within the fishery, but this also is primarily due to scallop dredge fishery discards. I don't calculate these. I could dig into that and follow up afterwards with you about the specific methodology. It has just been updated. I know Kelly's on listening in. I'm not sure if she's able to speak to this because she serves on the monkfish committee and might be able to quickly give you a few more details. Otherwise, I'd be happy to follow up with all the details on how that's calculated.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and it's not urgent, but it is a discards is a big factor in all the fisheries, and somehow we're we're still, now, I said this earlier on in my tenure on the commission, sometimes I feel we're still working with early 1900s or the 1900s technology in this modern technology that we have today. And gift cards is always of a concern. And but whether it's monkfish or any other thing, it's I think discards need to be addressed. And there's nothing we can do about this here or now, but I appreciate your getting back to me. Thanks.
So very good, Khalil. You'll follow up with Melanie offline.
Yeah, we can do that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Melanie?
Bill Amaru.
Bill,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Hi, Melanie. Can you go back to the cod slide, please? Okay, well, I guess I have to ask a fundamental question that I've been out of touch to the degree that I don't know anymore whether they're even talking about Georgia's east and west when they're talking about the quotas for Georgia's cod. Is that still used east and west?
Yeah, there are multiple quotas, and actually with cod, there's multiple assessments. So that's probably one of the problems, right? Because it's a transboundary stock. So the quota that we were dealing with right here, the ABCs I was talking about, were specific to Georges Bank cod as a whole. And then what happens is you have the Eastern Georges Bank deducted for the U.S. fishery. There is some movement that's allowed one direction, right? That you can bring your Eastern Georges Bank quota over to fish on the western side, but you can't do it vice versa.
So the numbers that you gave us were for the total then, right?
Yeah.
750
US,
metric?
yep. The U.S. total, yep.
So can you break it down to east and west so that we know what the inshore, the western portion would get versus the eastern?
Sure, I can. I don't want to give you bad numbers over this Zoom. So why don't I shoot an email out with all the specifics?
Right. That's one thing. And the other thing, I want everybody to realize that when it comes to cod, the reports that I'm hearing around the shoreline here, seeing, are that there's a lot more around than there have been in a number of years. And that the cost of picking up some quota, if you end up getting some codfish and you have an observer aboard and it's recorded as being caught, captured, and mortality occurs, the lease cost for a pound of cod is $4.50 a pound. So we have to bear in mind that there's a great deal of risk involved in making a groundfish trip, period, because the quotas are so low. You may be attempting to catch haddock and hake, and if you come up with a couple of boxes of cod, it could cost you the value of the entire trip. And that's what the guys are dealing with. And one of the reasons that there's so few groundfish trips being attempted out of ports like Chatham, Provincetown. Not that there's even a fleet of groundfish boats anymore in Provincetown, but there certainly is in Chatham. And the difficulties are just unbelievable that they have to deal with. And there are fish there to be caught. And we've been talking about this a little bit through the internet. I don't know what we can do about it, but I just want the commission to be aware that there's not a lot being said these days about groundfish trips, and that's one of the reasons.
thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
So you'll be able to maintain a conversation with Melanie offline on this subject matter?
Yes, we've been doing that, and I'll continue to.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments for Melanie?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Nicola, you're up. Thank you very much, Melanie. Excellent presentation as always.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commission. I'm going to give an update that covers the meeting last week between the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's Fluke Scup Sea Bass Board and the Mid-Atlantic Council. And the focus of this meeting was on the recreational measures for the coming year. Next slide. So there's a couple of the backdrop to this discussion, a couple things that I wanted to point out, that moving into 2023, there are a number of management changes in place. This is the first year that the revised sector allocations for the commercial and recreational fisheries are in place. So that has an effect that increases the recreational harvest limit for each species from what it would have been set. So that's the difference that you see in this table between the initial and the final amount of the RHLs for 2023. Most notable is the increase for scup. So the RHL for scup is up about over 50% this year. Of course, as always, when we're thinking about changes in the RHL, we're also thinking about what the landings have been in recent years to determine whether it's liberalizations or harvest for the coming year. And another factor for this year was that there was a recreational annual catch limit overages for scup and black sea bass based on the 3-year average of the catch compared to the ACLs. However, Garfo provided some good news in saying that because of the other recent actions that we're taking, they determined that additional measures to reduce harvest under the accountability measures would not be necessary this year, provided that the council and commission, took the necessary reductions or cuts that would be required just for setting the measures as usual. One improvement this year is that 2 models were developed to predict harvest in the coming year under the existing measures, as well as any measures that we want to use. This is an improvement because in past years, the practice is to just look at what the harvest has been and assume that it's going to be the same if we don't change the measures. And of course, that misses out on a number of factors such as year class strength, changes in effort. And so there's a lot of uncertainty with those estimates. So these models are meant to improve some of the precision there. Notably, there are 2 different models, which is something that came into play during the council and commission discussions. Another change is that moving into 2023, we are using the harvest control rule addendum that was recently passed to determine how much of a cut or reduction or liberalization is for each species. And this approach is dubbed the percent change approach. The benefits of it are that we're now using a confidence interval around the harvest predictions to compare to the RHL. And then there's also another look at the biomass before determining how much of a reduction or liberalization is taken. And so the result is that you kind of cap the amount of change that can happen in any year with an eye towards providing a little bit of additional stability in these fisheries. Next slide. So the harvest control rule is kind of defined by this table that the council and commission spent a lot of time looking at the meeting. And the first column is where you compare the harvest estimate to the RHL. And then you look at the middle column of what is the stock size compared to its target. That just comes out of the most recent stock assessment, whether it's very high, or low. And then you end up in one of these bins on the right-hand side that is a liberalizations or reductions that fall into a 40, 20, 10, or 0% change category. One click, Jared. And the outcome for scup and black sea bass is that the RHL for these species is lower than the harvest estimates under the existing measures, including the confidence interval that's around the harvest estimate. And these stocks, however, are in this very high category where their biomass is over 150% of the target. They're closer to 200% of their target. And so the outcome for these species for scup and black sea bass is a 10% reduction. For fluke, there was a different situation where there was 2 different estimates of harvest under the existing measures that led to either a 10% liberalization or a 10% reduction, depending on which of those you use through the chart. And so the council and commission made the decision to kind of split the difference there and go with status quo management for 2023. One more click. It's important to note that if this approach where we kind of bin the change that is required in any given year were not in place, then we would have been looking at larger reductions for sea bass and scup, and the potential of a 27% liberalization for fluke, or a 3% reduction depending on which of those estimates of harvest were used. Next slide. So the next 3 slides go into a little bit more of the numbers behind that graph, how the sausage was made. But the important outcome here is that there were, as I said, 2 different runs of the model to predict harvest that provided different estimates, one which encapsulated the recreational harvest limit and one that didn't. And that provides you with a different determination, a 10% liberalization or a 10% reduction. And so this is where the board and council and GARFO was willing to do this because they have a lot of influence in this process. Agreed to use status quo management for 2023. So for us, for our mass measures, we'll continue with a May 21st to September 29th season, 16.5 inch minimum size, and a 5 fish bag limit. Next slide. For scup, the situation was a little bit different. As I said, there was 2 models that were developed. One called the recreational demand model by the Science Center, and one the recreational fleet dynamic model. 2 acronyms that are unfortunately very close to one another for clarity of the issue. And that second model was developed by staff at Rhode Island, but depending on which model you used, it provided a outcome of either a 10% reduction for scup or a 10% increase for scup. And the monitoring committee was a little bit split where it wanted to go here, and it was recommending status quo management as an alternative. The week before the meeting, GARFO issued a letter that said that they had made a determination that the RDM model developed by the Science Center was the one that they were considering the best available science, and that if the council were to choose to use the other model and have a 10% increase in scup, GARFO would not approve that, and it would jeopardize the implementation of the percent change approach, which is still going through its final rulemaking process. And this would have led to a 35% reduction being needed for scup as opposed to the 10% reduction that was on the table. So NIMS kind of tied the council and commission's hands with this letter, and the result was for a 10% reduction for next year. As part of that, the council and commission changed the federal waters measures to reduce the season length by closing January through April, and also reducing the bag limit to 40 fish. These federal rules are important because they are the rules that the states of New Jersey South implement. Most of their harvest is in federal waters. However, collectively, it's generally only about 5% of the coastwide harvest. Massachusetts through New York tend to land about 95% of the scup harvest. And so while that change to the federal measures will probably make a small contribution to the necessary 10% reduction, it does mean that all of the states are going to contribute in some fashion. So then the next step here will be for Mass through New York to come together and determine how we are going to change the measures to make up that 10% reduction in total for the coast. Some of the early analysis indicates that it is going to be difficult. Few anglers take the bag limits that are 30 fish per angler, except during the bonus season on for hire vessels for a 2-month wave where it's 45 fish, or it's 50 now, sorry. And if one of the analysis showed that if you went to a 15 fish bag coast wide, that would only achieve a 4% reduction. So we are going to be looking at different ways to get there. I'm not sure what that outcome is going to be quite yet, but that'll be the next steps moving forward. And in black sea bass on the next slide. The outcome here was that both of the models that were being used to predict harvest for next year were indicating the need, despite the high size of the black sea bass stock, for a 10% reduction. And that is the outcome. Again, it's better than where we would have been for our measures next year had we not made these recent management changes for the recreational approach. In sea bass, each region, there are 3 of them, will need to provide measures for next year that achieve that 10% reduction. Our region is Mass through New York. Regions do not have to have the same measures in them, and we certainly do not in the northern region. In Mass, we have May 21st to September 4th, 16-inch minimum and 4 fish bag limit this past year. And the states in our region, most of them, put some priority on having a fishery later in the year. And so they go through December, they have different bags than us. So it's going to be some negotiations necessary to determine how our region is going to achieve that 10% reduction in an equitable fashion. In prior years, when there's been a reduction necessary, it's sometimes been, okay, each state is just going to do it on their own. But in my opinion, I think we need to start thinking about, what equitability means to anglers, and that's, their season length and the bag limit, as opposed to the outcome of how much harvest is being cut in their state. So there is some language in the management plan that talks about, each state doing this in an equitable way, where we consider prior year fishery performance. And I've highlighted that because if anyone's looked at our MRIP estimates for 2022, we've seen about a 55% reduction in sea bass harvest this year compared to the prior 4 years. So that'll certainly be a piece of information to take into these discussions within our region. But the TC will also be making recommendations about how to achieve that 10% cut within our region. And the next slide, the steps moving forward from here are for the technical committee to meet. There are 2 meetings set up for January where the TC will be establishing kind of the guidelines and the methods for the states and the regions to develop their proposals for scup and black sea bass. Because this is the first year where we're doing it this way, I do expect, there to be some hiccups maybe to the routine timeline for this. So it's a little bit unclear to me, but typically what we would do, and maybe we may try to stick to the schedule, is that the TC will establish those guidelines, those methods. The board meets the first week of February. And it will likely approve kind of a range of proposals that I'm hoping will then give an opportunity for the states to do some scoping as to where within that range of proposals, which direction we head. But ASMFC does need us to make decisions, usually early spring, in order to issue a letter to GARFO that says these are the measures that we're implementing in the states, so that GARFO can waive the federal waters measures in favor of the state measures. But as in years past, the tightness of the schedule, I expect, is going to result in our need to do emergency rulemaking to get the changes in place in time for these fisheries. And last slide, just a quick note on other issues that are open for comment right now. Under the ASMFC, the striped bass draft addendum 1 is out for public comment right now. This looks at considering transfers of coastal commercial quota. We did have our hearing in Massachusetts last night virtually with pretty good attendance. But if you couldn't hear that, there are another couple hearings, and the written comment deadline is January 13th. Additionally, another meeting that we're looking forward to will be mid-January, January 12th. We're put out an announcement of this meeting to continue to evaluate our options for changing the menhaden management in Massachusetts, both in response to the changes to the interstate plan, as well as to address other management and enforcement issues that have been raised. And that concludes my summary.
Questions for Nicola?
Mike Peardnock?
Michael, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Nicola. I'm just curious with the process with the black sea bass and the scup. When would there be public meetings for the public to provide comment, or to these options to be presented and the public to provide comment?
I can't say for sure quite yet. In years past, it's been in February that we've done a scoping meeting, not a formal public hearing, because we know we're gonna have to go through the emergency rulemaking process. So we'll strive to achieve that again. I know that there is always interest to get these rules established as quickly as possible. So we'll be doing our best to keep people apprised of the situation as it moves forward.
With the harvest control rule, that surely has saved the day. Things could have been a lot worse. I would hope we can maintain status quo for black sea bass and scup, because we've all heard it. There's just a tremendous number of biomass in our waters, and to see any cuts is going to be difficult to accept. Especially with the black sea bass at a 4 fish limit, but it seemed as though you were indicating that should go the status quo route. The scup reduction hopefully could be avoided, but I appreciate your help in this, and as noted, it could be a lot worse, and I commend you, Nicola, and DMF for all they've done to get us to this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Just to be clear, I want to note that the coast-wide implications for scup and black sea bass are a 10% reduction. So I would not expect status quo on those measures for either species. Black sea bass, whether one state takes a 2% cut and another state in the region takes a little bit of a higher cut because their rules are more liberal, that's the type of flexibility and negotiations that are going to need to take place still, but I wouldn't be expecting status quo for either species.
Thank you, Nicola.
One last question then. If that's the case, then what would be the bag limit or seasons for these species, or is that too early to know?
Too early to know, unfortunately. This year, these models that I've been mentioned will be used to project harvest under different measures. And we don't even have those, access to those models ourselves. We have to put in requests to the Science Center to look at different options for us. So that's kind of one of the hiccups that I was referencing, and that there's a potential that I think it's going to be a pretty busy next 2 months to figure out what the range of options could possibly be, to hopefully still have some time to get some public input.
One last quick one, if it's okay.
Go ahead, Michael.
If it's not clear to me whether this whole issue with PSEs over 50, whether they're being thrown out for all the different species, has that been done for these species, or is that still up in the air?
Are you referring to the new kind of policy about releasing MREP data?
Yes, in my understanding, anything over 50, PSCs over 50 will not be used for the stock assessments, or am I interpreting that incorrectly?
I believe that it is those data will not be released to the public on the query page. If you're looking for MREP data, if it has a PSC, that number is not going to be posted. But the data will still be used in stock assessments, and when the data are aggregated in general by year and state, the PSCs aren't that high. It's when you get down into the mode and wave specific estimates that you run into those issues.
So I would just ask if there's been a review of the PSCs to make sure that there's not some lone person in Florida, for example, which would be absolutely ridiculous, catching this fish, and then that skews the entire data set. We've seen that with cod or other species, so hopefully that can be looked at to make sure that's not the case with scup or black sea bass, because maybe that could give some flexibility to try to avoid these cuts.
Well, that is one of the benefits of the approach, where we're using a confidence interval around the harvest estimate. It's no longer just using the point estimate where you would be taking each of those estimates at face value, but we're now considering an 80% confidence interval around them before we compare that to the RHL. So there's less of a need to do the prior work that the technical committee was doing to look for those outliers and smooth them, because this approach is incorporating that confidence interval.
Thank you, Nicola. Appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions for Nicola? Jared, any hands?
Khalil?
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Again, I have to commend the DMF staff. Nicola, your work is always so precise and excellent and clear, and it's really truly appreciated. I just want to reaffirm that regarding the public hearing that was held last evening, Massachusetts hosted it for the Atlantic striped bass draft addendum number 1, and we had 57 attendees last night, 2 staff. I want to say I felt it was an extremely well-run meeting. I understand that, Emily Frank, I think that was her last name. She hosted it and moderated the evening. But Mike Armstrong and then Nicola and Dan McKiernan were all involved with it last evening. I just have to say I just felt it was so extremely well run, and it was clear. Last evening was a majority of the attendees were recreational. That seemed to be the majority of the attendees. Nonetheless, it was I felt a very well-run meeting and very meaningful, and I want to just thank everybody.
Thank you, Khalil. Questions, Jared?
I'm not saying anything further, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nicola, for your presentation.
You're very welcome.
And now we can move on to protected species management update. Who's this, Bob Glenn?
Yeah, I think Bob and I will tag team on this one. Bob has spent a lot of time over the last few months trying to develop the next round of regulations per the court's order to NIMS to accomplish sufficient risk reduction to meet what's called PBR, potential biological removal. And Bob's been hugely dedicated to that with Erin and some of the other staff, the stats staff to help provide those analyses. And so we've been working on that. And then this morning, there's like late breaking news that apparently this part of the federal budget might put a stop to that for at least 6 years. Bob, do you want to, I know you've probably had more time to study that language, which we just received at 8 o'clock this morning. Do you want to provide any background of what you're seeing in that?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, commissioners. I was going to provide you a fairly lengthy update on what was a very painstaking TRT meeting that happened on December 1st and 2nd, trying to get to that 90% risk reduction, and had that ready to go. And as Dan said, there was some late breaking news this morning. So that the Maine congressional delegation led by Senator Susan Collins has introduced an amendment to the omnibus spending bill that Congress is considering right now that essentially, and I'll read it so I don't botch it here. It says that notwithstanding any other provisions of law except as provided in subsection B for the period beginning on the date of the enactment of this act and ending on December 31st of 2028, the final rule amending the regulations implementing the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan shall be deemed sufficient to ensure the continued federal and state authorizations of the American lobster and Jonah crab fisheries are in full compliance with the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972 and the Endangered Species Act of 1973. So essentially, what this does is it puts a complete hold on all additional Atlantic large whale take reduction rulemaking for the next 6 years. It's basically deeming that those fisheries are in compliance with those two laws until that time period. And then there's additional language that further goes on to direct NOAA Fisheries to continue to work to develop regulations that will achieve potential biological removal. But again, it's not effective until after December 31st of 2028. And in addition to that, it also provides a bunch of additional funding available to both state and the federal agency to do additional and $6 million dedicated towards additional whale monitoring efforts, an additional $2 million to work with the fishing industry to cut for compliance assistance. And there's several other details, but this is kind of late breaking. This hasn't been voted on yet, but as we understand that this is likely going to have fairly broad-based support because it is tied to the larger spending bill. So Dan, I don't know if you have other things that you want to add, but
Yeah, I think what this is doing is it's addressing the concern that a lot of folks had, which was the court's edict for NIMS to accomplish these rigorous new risk reductions within 2 years. Was I guess by current government standards too fast. In other words, there's a lot of us who would like to see some of the considerations given to sort of reconsidering some of the factors that go into the pressures that we're dealing with. What I mean by that is, like we pointed out, that the mortality rates that they're looking at, go from 2015 through 19, which was some of the worst years of mortalities we've ever seen. But meanwhile, since 2019, the carcass count is way off. It's, we haven't seen anything like what we saw during those horrible years when those animals first went up to Gulf of St. Lawrence and suffered a whole lot of mortality. The other thing is the attribution of at least half of those, or half of the estimated mortality attributed to US and half to Canada. There's a lot of folks that want to see that reconsidered. There's a lot of detail about worst case scenarios being put into the model, in order to do whatever, on behalf of the endangered species. All of those were adding up to making it really, really hard for us to create rules that were going to reach the potential biological removal. So just to give you some insights, the average mortality in the last few years, I think, has been between 2 and 3 whales. That's been at least the average. And in order to get to PBR, we would need, or maybe that's higher, but we would need to go to under a whale a year. And that was going to be, of all the fisheries, and it was just so difficult to reach. So this gives us, if it does pass, it's going to give us some time. It's going to pump a lot of money into surveillance and ability to do this a little bit smarter going forward. And we'll see. It's kind of amazing that they're able to pull this off. So we'll see if it goes forward in the final version. Go ahead, Bob.
no, I think you summarized it pretty well, Dan. I mean, what this means for Massachusetts state waters is it doesn't really change very much because we were already going into this round of rulemaking at 86% because we'd already taken those measures in our pursuit of our incidental take permit. We're still planning to go forward full steam ahead with our incidental take permit application. Our intent is to send it to the final version of it to NOAA Fisheries before the 1st of this year, and we're confident that we'll be able to do that. And the primary reason that we need to stick with that is that basically covers our fishing activities over the long term and protects our fishermen from folks like anyone who would want to sue us relative to takes, because our takes currently wouldn't be covered. So for state waters, it doesn't really change much except that we're not in a rush to do any additional measures. And also for our federal waters fishery, it means quite a bit more in that we would have been facing fairly substantial additional closures and other risk reduction measures, including fishing with one buoy line and some other things that would have been really difficult to administer and implement, and really difficult for the fishery to deal with. Those things now are on hold for at least 6 years. And it's our hope that during that time, one, the outlook for right whales gets better, so that the level of conservation that's required isn't going to be as high. And two, it gives us more time to kind of come up with better solutions to kind of that are more workable for the fishing industry in that time. So we're pretty optimistic with that.
Yep.
Thank you, Bob. Questions for Bob or Dan? Jared?
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Suki, have you got any thoughts about this?
No, I'm just trying to comprehend it all, Ray. I don't think it's gonna do much for the closures we have in effect now, so we're pretty, Massachusetts so far ahead of the curve as far as everybody else goes. I'm not sure. There's gonna be some rollbacks of some of the closed areas that are questionable in the state of Massachusetts, be one thing, but I don't see that in this. I didn't get to read it yet, so I think, like Bob says, we're so far ahead of everything that it's not really going to do anything for Massachusetts, what's already in place. So it'll just slow down what's being proposed. And I mean, cryptic mortality, to mention that, that's one of the terminologies that the NGOs have come up with that I have a hard time with. So I haven't even heard of any dead whales in the last year or two, so maybe I'm missing something, but who knows? Just let it go for now.
Thank you, Suki. Well, once again, it's a credit to the Massachusetts harvesters and the DMF staff for being ahead of the curve, light years. Comments or questions?
Not seeing anything else.
Okay, then we can move along to recent stakeholder meetings on horseshoe crabs and summer flounder.
I think Jared's going to take this. I'll just cue it up for him. We held these meetings in the past few early winters, like we did this past week. Great attendance, really good feedback. Open conversations that people were really civil, and it was really we got a lot of compliments on the format and the timing of the meeting. I think we'll be talking here about some things we need to think about going forward. There was a lot of honesty. I think that went both ways in the meeting, and I think you'll learn that from Jared's presentation.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Dan. Jared?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So on December 13th, we held two stakeholder meetings, one on summer flounder and one on horseshoe crabs. The summer flounder meeting focused on recent fishery performance and how to improve quota utilization with the quota at the current elevated level, particularly looking towards the 2023 season. The horseshoe crab meeting focused on the changing dynamics of the fishery due to increasing demand for the biomedical industry and some of the effects that's having on the bay fishery, as well as some of the concerns from the conservation community. So I sent you all the full presentations that were provided at both these meetings as part of your monthly meeting materials, and I've kind of condensed that here into some of the high notes. So I'll start with summer flounder. This chart here shows the rate changes that we implemented for this past year, or this current year, this past fishing season. So if you recall, with the quota going up to about 1.4 million pounds and underutilization in 2020 and 2021, we held stakeholder meetings last winter to develop a series of measures to enhance quota utilization for 2022. And you know, those were somewhat successful in raising the level of landings. We took about 775,000 pounds of the quota this year, which is still underutilizing the quota, but it's better than we took in more recent years. So the actions may have had some impact on landings, but again, the quota remains underutilized. This looks at landings over the past few years and how the quota has been utilized. So since 2019, we've been underutilizing the quota, although we have raised landings over the past few seasons, likely attributable in part to some of the regulatory changes enhancing access to the quota. So with the quota being set again at about 1.4 million pounds and us running about a 40% underage this year, we wanted to take comments on how to amend the management of this fishery. As you guys voted on earlier, part of that profile of things that we are going to do, the first step was to enhance access for the winter one or the period one fishery, which we did today by increasing that trip limit to 10,000 pounds. And so this meeting focused primarily on the summertime fishery. One of the things that was discussed at length was price trends and fitting the summertime fishery around these price trends. So you'll see landings in red and price per pound in blue. I'd ask you to disregard the wintertime landings because this is done on a daily basis. Those red hash marks during the wintertime reflect only those days at which more than 2 trips were landed for confidentiality reasons. Other days during the winter, there may be landings, but they're not shown on this chart because they're confidential. So the purpose of this is more to look at the price per pound value. And we can see that that this fishery starts off in the late spring and early summer with a very high ex-vessel value. And then it becomes more and more diminished, or it maintains its value throughout the summer when there is demand for it. And then it's diminished during the late fall and winter periods. And that's usually commensurate when the fishery moves offshore and large amounts of landings are coming into some of those mid-Atlantic states. So one of the things that we struggle with here is when we save the quota for the fall period and we up the limits in September, October, November, December, we're upping them at a time where there's already large amounts of quota available along the coast and the price is really low. So one of the things that our fishery asks us to look for, which I'll get into a bit more on the next slide, is to try to match the timing of the fishery and the timing of high limits with when there is a strong price for the product. So we discussed a variety of issues with the fleet. It was predominantly the trawl fleet, although there were a small number of hook and line fishers in attendance. And we discussed a number of things as to how to improve the utilization of this quota in 2023 and moving forward, should the stock assessment keep the stock assessment coming out next year, keep the quota elevated at in 2024 and beyond. So here are a few of the things that we will be looking at for rulemaking for the 2023 season. There was a request to analyze the potential for decreasing the net mesh size from 6.5 inches, which is the current statewide standard, to 5.5 inches, which is the minimum size allowed under the summer flounder FMP. Anything under 5.5 inches, you're subject to a 100-pound bycatch limit for summer flounder. Consider increasing the summertime trip limits for all gear types, particularly during the late spring and early summer when the price is elevated. So that would be, maintaining a higher trip limit or starting off the season with a higher trip limit rather than going from a 500-pound trip limit where it currently is during the spring and summer months to an 800-pound trip limit in September, perhaps starting off the season with a higher trip limit. There was also a request to amend how our bycatch provision applies. So as I said, if you're fishing with mesh smaller than 5.5 inches, you're subject to a 100-pound trip limit under the FMP. The squid fishery occurs during the spring months when the summer flounder fishery is also occurring. Historically, we didn't open the directed fishery for summer flounder until after the directed fishery for squid. We amended that last year so the summer flounder fishery can open or remains open throughout the year and doesn't have a bycatch season. As a result of that, we adopted a bycatch rule that restricted net bycatch to 100 pounds of fishing with small mesh or in possession of 250 pounds of scup. Not scup, squid rather. We were asked to revisit that bycatch provision as far as it applies to the threshold for squid possession, and perhaps allow a higher limit of summer flounder when in possession of squid, provided that the net mesh requirements are adhered to. There was some discussion about adopting a Rhode Island style weekly aggregate landing program, which would involve daily EVTR reporting and vessel tracking. This is something we will investigate, but it's unlikely that I'm not optimistic it's something we'll be able to pull off for this upcoming season, but we could consider the expansion of our current period 2 pilot program, which allows you to take multiple limits over multiple days and land them. So it's not dissimilar from an aggregate program, but I don't think we have all the ability to pull off the aggregate program for this year. But that was certainly something that the industry was interested in us pursuing, particularly from a dealer perspective. It allowed them to better kind of stage how they were going to offload vessels throughout the course of the week to even out supply and address some of the issues that have been occurring on the Cape in terms of the availability of trucks to offload boats, by spreading out the fishery and allowing vessels to aggregate landings. They could better manage that. We discussed enhancing access to this fishery. As I stated earlier, when we're doing the period 1 in-season adjustment, one of the biggest constraining factors on performance in the summer flounder fishery, or the summertime summer flounder fishery, has been a loss of effort. So one of the things that we've been discussing internally, and we've also been discussing with the commission subcommittee on permitting, is how to enhance access to fisheries where quota is available. This is one of them. And one of the challenges with enhancing access is balancing that against the capital investment people have in their permits. Because as you increase access to a limited entry fishery, you could potentially increase the amount of permits that may be transferable, and thus the equity involved in those permits. So we heard from the fleet that there's significant concerns about opening up access, whether through the issuance of new permits or the relaxation of transferability criteria. So that's we remain interested in enhancing access, but there is concerns from the fleet about balancing that and controlling that. Some fleet members supported a wait and see approach, given that there is a stock assessment coming up this year that may be used for management in 2024 and resulting quota changes, that maybe rather than embarking on a series of new rules this year, we keep the current rules. That said, there was strong support from the dealer sector for us not to do that and to better utilize the quota. And then there was some interest in reconsidering the period 1 and period 2 allocations if the quota is elevated. Say if the quota is more than 1 million pounds, then the quota allocation shifts from 30/70 to 50/50, and that was discussed. So I will take any questions we have on summer flounder before I move into horseshoe crabs.
Questions for Jared?
Sookie?
Yeah, thanks,
You're
Ray.
up,
Thanks,
Bernard.
Jared. I just, talking to a couple of fluke guys, I've gotten a couple calls about this, and I'm not sure if, the daily limit thing seems to be a concern, and their ability to get the fish off the boats. I mean, I find it hard to believe that the biggest problem that takes place in the summertime down is whether you can actually take out your fish or not. They don't seem to think that there's any inability to catch the fish. It's just whether they can get in to take them out. So I think we ought to look more into being able to have, a couple more days worth of fish on the boat, because anytime there's quotas involved, then you talk about discards of other species, and guys could go out and catch a couple more days worth of fluke. They wouldn't be, going up fishing on so many days and throwing stuff overboard, trying to get their fluke limits and worrying about getting in to take out. I don't think the availability of fish down there was the issue. It's, getting back to the takeout thing. And I think if the state could, I'm not sure what the port projections say down there. The port report just come out about the availability of commercial places to take out, and if towns got seaport bond bills to enhance their waterfronts, but they've squeezed commercial fishermen off of some of the docks down there with some of this new building that's going on down there. Maybe we should look into that, but
yeah,
I'd hate to see the stock assessment come out and then Massachusetts hasn't been catching their quota. So you know what'll happen? The other states will be wanting to get some quota, and where they're going to get it from? They're going to get it from the states who didn't catch their quota. So I think we should keep that in mind too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sookie. So a couple follow-ups to that, and that was a comment that we heard a lot, was that there are fewer fish buyers taking out fluke, and as a result of that, there's less. It's more difficult to offload, and that was some of the interest in expanding the cargo pilot program or adopting a weekly aggregate program, is it would help lessen some of that burden. Something that wasn't on the slide but is worth mentioning as something that we will be considering is the fluke landing window. You're currently prohibit nighttime landing of fluke, but there was some interest in rescinding that, so that they would have greater flexibility to offload, as frequently the trucks aren't available until much later in the evening, 8, 9 o'clock, for them to offload too. As for the quota and its utilization, I don't think we're too worried about losing quota to other states. As Dan said, the original quota shares were set in the early 1990s, and it wasn't until recently where there was a demonstrable shift in the geographic distribution of the species, where quota reallocations were considered, and that was done contingent on quotas being elevated at a certain level to provide the Northeast states with more quota. So I don't think we're particularly concerned about us losing the quota to other states if we don't utilize it generally, and specifically here, because there is a coastwide underutilization occurring. So there's not a lot of quota starved states at present. Dan, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I just want to say that our historic fluke regulations were really built around a model where you could make a lot of money on 500 pounds of fluke. I'm sorry, enough money on 500 pounds of fluke to head down to Cape Cod for the summer. And today we have a much reduced fleet. We have, so there's, as Jared said, there's fewer dealers, and there's some serious efficiency issues now. And I think we need to modernize our rules consistent with the current reality. The facts on the ground are, we probably have a third of this fleet that's trying to eke out a living. I'm really interested in seeing the potential for this aggregate program just for the efficiency purposes, because, if you look around the room at some of these guys, they're really concerned that there isn't a generation coming in behind them that want to do this because the rules as written, and by the way, the rules were written with the support of the people in the room who are looking very depressed, but it's not a successful business model right now. And for them to be able to have more efficiency and land multiple days makes a lot of sense at this point. I was not in favor of it because I didn't feel it could really be enforced very well. But given the fact that Rhode Island's done it successfully, we have EVTRs, we can put trackers on the vessels. I just think we need to modernize this approach. I think we're stuck in the past a little bit, and I'll do everything. If it's something that the commission wants to do, I'll prioritize this and try to get it launched for this year.
Yeah, one more thing, thinking about this, with an increase in either the daily limit or multiple days, people will be able to utilize steaming to other ports to take out and take some of the pressure off of the limited access to docks that takes place in Cape Cod. So, that should be a consideration too, that, if it's worth it to be steamed to New Bedford or, even back up along the North Shore here somewhere type of thing. All right, thanks for that.
Thank you, Suki. Mike Pearnock.
Michael, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few things. I commend DMF for trying to find a mechanism to be able to use this quota, catch this quota, and our ongoing environmental factors or environmental conditions, continue to impact the fishery, whether it's your commercial or recreationally fishing, and having the fish move out in deeper, cooler waters. So I hope there's something here that works and then is fair for all. That to implement such needs to consider the impact to the recreational community or different gear types. That if you do have the overlap of when the commercial fishing will take place while the recreational fishing is take place, we're going to need a balance to make sure it is fair and equitable to each gear type. So need to keep that in mind. I was curious with the decrease in mesh size, how much that would increase the bycatch. And if you look at that in combination with possibly fishing during certain periods of time where you'll have black sea bass or other species, but let's say specifically black sea bass, if they're spawning, we wouldn't want to have a situation where we're catching black sea bass. So I'm assuming that's being considered. But I'm curious with the estimate with the mesh size. And just one more question, that when they catch their bycatch limit, do they go home? Do they throw it overboard and keep fishing? How does that presently work? Thank you.
So Mike, the bycatch issue is certainly one that we will be looking to investigate as we analyze this over the winter for potential implementation 2023. As for what occurs once bycatch limits are met, there is no requirement that the trip stop. Just at that point, any additional fish above and beyond those limits is discarded. So what we try to do on the management side is to set those trip limits at level for I don't want to non-directed species or try to set the trip limits at levels so that can be managed and minimized to the greatest extent practical. And one of the challenges we're going to face with an aggregate program is that it's not just an aggregate program for summer flounder. It would have to be an aggregate program for the variety of species that are taken in this mixed species trawl fishery, scup, black sea bass, whelk, horseshoe crab. Because if a vessel's fishing on a multi-day trip, we don't want it, by virtue of taking wanting to enhance the landings of summer flounder, we do not want to, encourage the regulatory discarding of these other species. So that's something that we discussed at length at this scoping meeting, and is something that we're going to have to really work to tease the nuance out of and right size when adopting any weekly aggregate program.
One last question. So what's the next step here? Will it be an, you'll
Sure. So the
summarize-
next step, over the course of this winter, you folks should expect to see a proposal package coming from us as to, that describes the items that we intend to take out to public hearing and our rationale and justification for those changes. Then we'll probably proceed to public hearing, hopefully by hopefully in March, to conclude rulemaking by May 1. But again, I temper all expectations on rulemaking to start this next calendar year due to the change in administrations and the likelihood that there are, mandated delays as they implement, regulatory review teams and procedures. So that, ideal situation would be March public hearing for rulemaking on May 1, but that's all subject to, forthcoming changes to the rulemaking process with the incoming administration.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're
Yes, thank you.
recognized.
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat any of the things that have been said. Everything has been very well covered. I've heard Dan say that he's accepting of the idea of going to the aggregate weekly landing limits, and that'll be explored in the future. And I think that's a good thing. I've spoken to the fishermen in the area here. It seems to be that that's something that reflects what Dan said about the changes that have occurred in this fishery and our need to adapt to those changes. The other thing I'd want to mention is the concept of expanding possibilities for incoming fishermen versus losing the value of currently limited numbers of permits. I think we just have to face the fact that to have a future in the fishery, we're going to have a lowered value to perhaps a limited number of permits that are out there now. I mean, if we want to have a fishery like they have in Canada, where there's numerous millionaires that have been able to accumulate quota and now are racing horses and traveling between their properties in Florida and up on Newfoundland and the coast of Nova Scotia. We simply have to face the fact that this fishery is going to reflect the need of entry. And we have to do that. We have to make it possible, whether we loosen up the restrictions on permit transfers, which to me makes more sense than creating new permits. It's what's going to happen to get young people in the fishery. I feel pretty strongly about that. I'm one of those people who will lose some value in the things that I've owned over the years, but it's a sacrifice that we need to make. If there's some other way of coming about it without lowering the values, I'd like to listen to it, but I don't know how it could happen. To me, it's more important to get young people into the fishery than it is to secure the retirement needs of older fishermen who thought that they had a 401k in their permits. And I'll probably get a lot of crap for saying that because it'll get out, but that's what I believe.
Thank you, Bill, and that's why I believe you're on the subcommittee.
All right, so I will quickly move on to horseshoe crabs. There's not as much here, just some quick data points. So this is performance of the fishery over time. You'll see most recently that the landings are down the past few years, and that compared to the recent timeline, we haven't taken the quota since 2019. This is kind of performance trends for this year. We've taken about 80% of the available quota. And it's in the 5-year average, it's performing similar to the 2017 fishery. One of the biggest changes from in 2022 was the arrival of a new biomedical firm in Massachusetts, that increased competition for the crabs, with the low ex-vessel value that some vessels were receiving for the crabs. There was an interest in shifting over from the bait fishery to the biomedical fishery, to take advantage of a little bit of a higher price per pound and a higher trip limit. This created some angst on the waterfront. There was a lot of frustration among dealers and among horseshoe crab bait dealers and some of the trawlers participating in the bait fishery that on the dealer side, that some of the boats that they used to offload were now offloading to the biomedical firm, and there was some frustration among some of the harvesters in the bait fishery that, why do these guys get to participate in the biomedical fishery and I don't? So in terms of participating in the biomedical fishery, what we've told what we require of the harvesters is that they give up their bait permit for the calendar year and that they have a working relationship with the biomedical firm. And we defer to the biomedical firm to determine who they want to work with. And that has a lot to do with, who they have working relationships with and who's willing to kind of implement the best management practices for handling these crabs to maximize survivability and ensure that their catch can be bled. So this kind of created some issues in both the bait fishery and the biomedical fishery that we were looking to resolve. On the bait fishery, some of the things that we'll be looking at this winter is raising the current trip limit. There was interest in bringing it back to historic levels for the current trip limit for trawlers is 300 crabs. Some interest in making this, bringing it back to historic levels, which was 500 crabs, or even bringing it up so that it's equal with the 1,000 crab biomedical limit. Was a comment we got from some of the dealers and some of the fishermen. We discussed increasing access to the fishery among trawlers. There are some trawlers participating in that Nantucket Sound mixed species trawl fishery that don't have the horseshoe crab endorsement, and we'd like to see them, be able to land horseshoe crabs. We have a 75 crab limit for open entry, those who don't have the permit, but if they're participating in this fishery and they're catching this species as a bycatch, and we're not utilizing the quota, we want to encourage that fish to be landed. Again, there was some opposition to that from the permit holders, as looking at that, it would devalue their permit or undermine their investments. The mobile gear fleet talked about eliminating the lunar closures. We have a series of lunar closures, 5-day closures around each new and full moon during the spring months, and they wanted to eliminate that to move the fishing off the beach. And on the biomedical side, focus really was on developing best management practices, focus on harvest and handling to reduce any incidental mortality that may occur outside of bleeding. Then there was some discussion about the ability to participate in the biomedical trawl fishery if you were participating in the summer flounder aggregate program, because of the need to potentially keep these crabs in good working condition for the biomedical firm on multi-day summer flounder trips. Increasing participation in the rent-a-crab program, which is the program where bait crabs are borrowed from bait dealers and bled by the biomedical firm and then returned to the bait dealers, as well as the fate of crabs subject to incidental mortality in the biomedical fishery, and if those crabs should be relegated to the bait fishery as they're currently discarded. The conservation community also spoke up and they raised a number of issues that they have with the horseshoe crab fishery. There was really a focus on the intrinsic value of horseshoe crabs to the community and their cultural value. And they want to see more conservation done. This includes increasing spawning protections for all gear types, moving towards a full spawning closure or the elimination of the harvest of females during the spawning period, closing Wellfleet Harbor and other Western Cape Cod Bay embayments due to what they see on their beaches as poor resource status, eliminating the bait fishery and phasing out of the biomedical fishery in favor of a synthetic LAL substitute. And they were interested in developing new metrics for measuring abundance and feasibility of egg density studies on beaches. So those are the major talking points there. And we'll be looking over some of these talking points and some of these discussion points in developing a potential rulemaking package for 2023, which would be similar to the same timelines as summer flounder, which would be ideally a March public hearing for May 1 implementation, but subject to potential delays due to the incoming administration. So
Thank
I'll
you,
take
Jared.
recognize that we're just past noon, so I will take any questions. And I'll
Yeah,
try to keep it
questions for
short as
Jared,
possible.
please? Any questions for Jared?
Suki?
Suki,
Yeah,
you're
I just,
recognized.
thanks. I was just wondering about what the fate of the crabs were. Do you have any real hard data on mortality, after they get released back in from the biomedical fisheries?
Bob, can you recall offhand what the bleeding mortality is? About 10%?
Yeah, the coast-wide, the stock assessment uses an assumption of 15% mortality from bleeding.
So that's in crabs that have been bled, what they estimate that after they've been returned, what the mortality is. There's also some in the biomedical trawl fishery, there's also going to be some amount of mortality that occurs during the harvest and handling of those crabs. And that's something that we're trying to get a better handle on. And we'll continue to be trying to get a better data on in the 2023 season. So that would be, mortality in the nets, mortality before it reaches the biomedical firm.
Is there any more companies trying to get into this business? Do you know?
Bob?
Not that we're currently aware, but it's nothing we can predict.
Okay.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, I'm
Any
not
other
seeing-
questions?
Not seeing any further comments. Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was one of the boats that returned these crabs to the water for the fishery that occurs in the eastern part of the sound. And I would ask that the state implement a program of observations of our releases and determine a new mortality acceptable rate, the 15% rate. Once the fishery is smoothed out, and there are issues that have to be taken care of at the beginning of any new fishery, but once they're understood and proper practices are put in place, you'll discover that the mortality rate is far less than 15%.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. I'm not seeing any further comments from the commission, Mr. Chair, if you want to move on to other business.
Yes, other business, commission member comments, please. We'll start with Michael Pierdnock.
I'm good, thank you. And if I don't have anything more to say, everybody have a good Christmas and a happy new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Tim Brady. Tim? Moving on, Khalil.
Khalil
He's got
was
his audio
booted.
and he can see slides, but he cannot comment. He wishes everybody the remainder of a good holiday season. Bill Doyle. Bill Doyle.
Yes, I'm set, Ray. Just Merry Christmas to everyone. Yes,
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas to everyone. I'm all set.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Amaru.
Yeah, same here. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, stay safe.
Thank you, Bill. Shelley Edmondson.
I'm all set too, Ray, and happy holidays, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelley. Lou.
Y'all set, Ray, and Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah and everything, whatever turns you on, and see you guys next year.
Thank you, Lou. Suki.
Yeah, same thing, Ray. All set. Just Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, everybody. See you next year.
Okay, and I'll close out. I'm going to applaud and commend the commission members for being proactive in their working relationship with DMF staff and the public. Likewise, I commend the entire DMF staff for the responsiveness to the inquiries of both members of the commission and the public. I wish a happy and safe remainder of the holiday season. So we're going to move to public comment. Have we got anybody from the public who wants to say anything, Jared?
We do. Sherry Heller, you're recognized.
Sherry,
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
yes?
It's Charles Heller, just so you know, and I'm with the Southeastern Massachusetts Pine Barrens Alliance. I had a couple of comments. I just wanted to commend Dan McKiernan for running an excellent stakeholder meeting. I felt that everybody in the room had a chance to be heard and was listened to. So I was very impressed with that, and I want to thank him publicly for that. I also thought Jared Silva did an excellent job of recapping the comments from that meeting. I just wanted to underscore a couple of points he made from the conservation community. Our wishes is that you will consider ending the harvest of horseshoe crabs for bait. And secondly, consider bringing Massachusetts in line with other states in horseshoe crab management and end the harvest of horseshoe crabs during spawning season. So I just wanted to make a extra strong plea for that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
Cheryl.
much.
Happy holidays.
Well, if we have
Oh, we
nobody
got
else,
one more, Mr. Chair. We got Beth Casoni.
Beth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commission members. I'd like to thank Bob Glenn for his due diligence during the Atlantic Large Wheel Take Reduction Team meetings, December 1st and 2nd. They were really tough conversations to have. I'm definitely excited about hearing about this omnibus spending bill, which I did a quick Google search and it's 4,155 pages. So if there's any information on what section or page these fisheries issues are noted, I did reach out to our federal delegation for input. I also had a question on the ITP, and once it's submitted to National Marine Fisheries Service, is it pretty much radio silence on the application? There'll be no updates or any communication? That's just a general question, and Bob can email me later. And then I just wanted to give the commission a quick update. I was appointed to the American Fisheries Advisory Committee, which is a national committee that will oversee the Saltonstall Kennedy grant program. And we had our first meeting in Seattle last week and it went very well. And I was also appointed vice chair. I'm looking forward to being there for the fisheries. And from the first meeting, I have a good feeling that the SK funds will come more towards the fisheries than before. That's all I have. Happy holidays, everyone. Great job. Oh, and I did have one more thing. During the week-long meeting, all my peers from around the nation, they all commended the Division of Marine Fisheries, and they were all impressed at all of the presentations that they've had interactions with, whether it was at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission or the council meetings. And that comes from the West Coast to Hawaii and all other states. So I'm proud to be from Massachusetts. Thank you very much. Have a great holiday, everyone.
Thank you, Beth. We also have Phil Coates on the line. Phil, you're recognized. Jared, what happened to Phil?
Phil, you're recognized. You can unmute yourself. Phil, it looks like you're still muted. So it doesn't seem like you're coming through today. If you want to put your comments in an email, I can forward them to the commission.
All right.
Oh, Phil, you're there.
Oh, well, just very briefly, I'm sorry. I'm a technological nerd. No, I'm not. On the fluke, when is the next fluke assessment due, if I can ask that question?
It'll be done this year for management in 2024, or this coming year for management in 2024.
Okay, the reason I raise that is, with all the state's landings down, I just don't want to harken back. I just remember what happened to another stock, this one in the Gulf of Maine, cod, that was misassessed. And then you've seen the consequent, well, along with a lot of other interactions and involvements, what the consequences of that situation. Other than that, I will also like to convey my best wishes to everyone for a successful holiday and a good holiday season. And again, congratulate the agency and the commission for a job well done. Take care.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Phil.
Phil.
All right, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Suki. Who's gonna second?
Second it, Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley.
Not seeing any objections.
Then this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays.